Welcome to Teolumen Insights, where we reveal the hidden forces that shape the way you live and show you how to use them to create real transformation and supercharge your health, mindset, and daily life. Here are your hosts, Emma Greenwood and Nathan Sinclaire.
Welcome back to Teolumen Insights. Ready for another deep dive into some fascinating ideas? I'm Nathan Sinclaire.
And I'm Emma Greenwood, always up for exploring new concepts.
Well, today we're diving into the work of a thinker who's really piqued your interest, Friedrich Hölderlin. You've given us quite a collection of sources on him, his own writings, scholarly articles, even some literary criticism.
Yeah, I'm really trying to grasp the core of his philosophy, how he saw the world,
Humanity's place in it, all of that.
Exactly. And one thing that struck me going through this material, Hölderlin doesn't shy away from complex ideas. Even paradoxical ones, really. He sees the world as this constant tension between opposing forces.
And it's within that tension that he finds meaning.
That seems to be his view, yes.
All right, so let's get into some of those tensions. One that jumped out at me was his concept of measure and sobriety, especially how he connects them to poetry. It's not just about being disciplined, is it?
No, not at all. For Hölderlin, measure and sobriety are the foundation of creativity. He believes true poetic inspiration, what he calls Begeisterung, needs to be balanced by craftsmanship. It's like a sculptor. They need passion to envision a masterpiece, but also the skill to shape the material.
So it's a dance between enthusiasm, that spark of inspiration, and the discipline to mold it into something lasting. And I'm guessing fanaticism comes in as the danger here.
You got it. Hölderlin sees the power of inspiration, that passionate energy, but he also sees how it can become destructive if it's not tempered by reason, by skill. Fanaticism, for him, is that unchecked enthusiasm leading to chaos and ultimately to the failure of the creative process.
So fire and water.
Yeah.
You need both to create something truly enduring.
I like that analogy.
Another pairing that caught my eye, mechanism and device. It sounds almost technical, like we're talking about machines.
Yeah.
But he applies these terms to poetry and even our experience of the world.
And that's where it gets really interesting. He saw this link between the technical parts of poetry structure, rhyme schemes, meter, and how we perceive reality. He thought our minds have a kind of mechanism for processing information, like tools or devices that help us make sense of the world.
So our very perception is structured in a way. It helps us organize the chaos of experience into something comprehensible.
That's the idea. Which then raises the question, if our perception is shaped like this by these underlying structures, how much control do we really have over what we see and how we interpret it?
Which leads us to another tension, skill versus fate. This is a classic theme. Are we masters of our destiny, or are we playing out a predetermined script?
It's a question he explores through his characters. Many of them are struggling against these seemingly impossible obstacles, like Oedipus, for example, a classic tragic figure trying to escape his fate but unable to do so.
Right, and this struggle plays out on a societal level, too. Hölderlin was writing during a time of massive political and social upheaval, so the question of individual will versus larger forces was very much alive.
Absolutely. And his work doesn't offer a simple answer. It seems to suggest it's an interplay, a complex one, between our choices and the circumstances we're born into.
So acknowledging the limits of control, but also emphasizing the importance of striving, of doing what we can with what we're given.
I think that's a good summary.
Means and middle is another concept that caught my eye. At first, it sounds like he's advocating for compromise, but I suspect it's deeper than that.
You're right. For Hölderlin, the middle way isn't about settling. It's about finding a dynamic balance between extremes. And he saw this as essential for art and for life itself.
It's not about avoiding conflict or tension, but rather holding those opposing forces together.
In a way that creates something new, something vibrant.
Okay, so far we've touched on some major tensions running through his work. But there's a whole other set of concepts we haven't even unpacked yet. Law, tones, names, the immediate. It's like he's creating a new vocabulary to think about the world.
And those terms aren't just abstract ideas. They're woven into his poetry, his reflections on art and culture. He's reaching for something profound, trying to understand our relationship to nature, to something bigger than ourselves.
And that's where those really mind-bending concepts come in, right? Higher connection, more infinite connection, divine madness, the sacred. This isn't just philosophy, it's pointing towards a completely different way of experiencing the world.
Exactly. And that's what makes Hölderlin so challenging and so rewarding. He's not giving us answers, he's inviting us to question everything we thought we knew, to see the world with fresh eyes.
This is already getting me intrigued. But before we jump into specific examples, I'm curious, what's standing out to you so far? What's piqued your curiosity?
You know, it's the way Hölderlin takes these abstract philosophical ideas and connect them to concrete experiences. The craft of poetry, how we perceive things, even the choices we make.
He's not just theorizing, he's grounding it in real life, in the everyday.
Exactly. That's what makes it feel so relevant, so timeless. He's wrestling with questions that are as old as humanity itself, but he's doing it in a way that feels urgent, even today.
That's a great point. So with that in mind, let's turn to some of the sources you've shared and see how these ideas play out. One theme that seems key is his fascination with ancient Greece, this idea of the foreign. Where should we start with that?
Well, one source describes it as the central area of Hölderlin's poetic world. It suggests everything he wrote either leads to or comes from Greece. And the specific places and historical figures he chose, they really embody different aspects of Greek achievement he admired.
So it's not just this vague, romanticized idea of Greece. He's engaging with it very specifically.
Right, and using it as a framework for his own philosophical explorations. One source even notes that his main concern was to relate Greece to Teolumen,
To find threads of continuity, points of connection between these two seemingly different cultures.
Exactly. But to your point, wasn't his view of Greece somewhat idealized? No culture is perfect?
Was he maybe projecting his own desires onto the past?
That's a good question, and I think it gets to his concept of the foreign. He knew Greece was inspiring, but also fundamentally different from his own time. It was other, both alluring and unsettling.
So not just imitating Greek art or culture. It was about engaging with that otherness, letting it challenge his own assumptions.
Exactly, and that's where harmony and opposition comes in. He believed true unity doesn't erase differences, but finds a way for them to coexist, even thrive in a state of tension.
Real growth happens when we encounter something that disrupts our comfortable worldview. It forces us to expand.
You got it. And you see this in his translations of Greek texts, especially Sophocles' Antigone. One source mentions his translations are known for their naughty thought and awkward diction.
Not exactly easy reads.
Not at all. They've startled readers for centuries.
Is that deliberate? Is he trying to make Sophocles more difficult?
I don't think so. I think he's trying to convey the true depth of the original. He's not simplifying. He's grappling with those nuances, the ambiguities, the things that traditional interpretations often miss.
Help me understand this. How does his idea of poetic logic play into this? The way he contrasts it with traditional philosophical logic.
Well, traditional logic is all about reason, clear arguments, step-by-step deductions. It's very linear. But Hölderlin sees poetic logic as something more intuitive, working on a deeper level.
So it's like poetry can access truths that reason alone can't reach.
That's the idea. It taps into a different way of knowing. And in his Antigone translation, that's exactly what he's trying to reveal, that hidden layer of meaning, all those oscillations and nuances that drive the tragedy.
What are some of those key insights he brings to Antigone? What's his take on it?
Well, one is his focus on Antigone's oddness, her loneliness. Traditional views see those as flaws. But Hölderlin connects them to her unique symbolic and legal status. She's the last surviving child of Oedipus, which places her in a very specific position within Thebes. He even calls her queen, which isn't in the original text.
Emphasizing her potential power.
Exactly. He's drawing out those underlying power dynamics, the way her very existence challenges the status quo. And then there's his emphasis on Dionysus, the god of, wine, ecstasy, transgression. For Hölderlin, the conflict between Antigone and Creon plays out against this backdrop of Dionysian energy, this primal force that threatens to disrupt everything.
Makes sense, right? Dionysus is all about the wild, the irrational. He represents this energy that can be both creative and destructive.
And remember, Hölderlin was fascinated by the mysteries of Eleusis, those secret rites associated with Demeter and Dionysus. He saw those mysteries as embodying this kind of knowledge that's beyond us. Something we can only access through ritual, through experience.
So reason has its limits. Some truths can only be grasped through intuition, through direct encounter.
That's right. And Antigone, with its themes of transgression and divine law, becomes this powerful vehicle for exploring that idea. Which brings us back to divine madness, right? He saw madness not just as a disorder, but as a potential pathway to understanding.
But isn't that a risky path? And was his view of divine madness maybe influenced by his own struggles? Is there a danger in romanticizing something that can be so debilitating?
It's definitely a complex question. It's tempting to connect his experiences directly to his ideas, but we have to remember he was engaging with a long tradition of thought that saw madness as this source of both inspiration and danger.
Right, a reminder to approach these ideas with nuance, with both sensitivity and intellectual rigor. What were some of your big takeaways from this discussion of Antigone?
For me, it's how he uses this play to explore those larger questions about law, the limits of human understanding, the tension between individual and society. It's like he's using the text as a springboard for his own philosophical journey.
Yeah, it highlights the power of literature to engage with those timeless questions, to challenge our assumptions, to expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
Absolutely. And Hölderlin's work is a prime example of how art and philosophy can intertwine, each enriching the other.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Hesperia. Now, that's a term loaded with history and mythology, but he seems to be giving it his own unique spin.
Oh, absolutely. In classical mythology, Hesperia was often used as a poetic name for Italy, or the Iberian Peninsula even, but Hölderlin uses it to represent something very specific, his own homeland, Swabia.
He's grounding this ancient term in his own personal geography.
That's right. And this is where his fascination with Greece comes full circle. He saw Greece as this lost ideal, this model of harmony and beauty.
But also believed that a new Hesperian civilization could emerge, one that combined the best of both worlds.
Exactly. It's not just nostalgia for the past, it's looking forward, envisioning a future where those ancient ideals can be reborn.
Was that a realistic vision, though? Germany in his time was very different from ancient Greece. Could he really reconcile those two cultures?
Well, that's where his idea of the middle, the means, comes in. He saw Hesperia as this place where opposites could be reconciled, where Greek ideals of beauty and harmony could be integrated with the, I guess, more rugged, inward-looking qualities of German culture.
A kind of cultural alchemy,
Yeah.
blending different elements to create something new and unique. But how did he see that happening? Did he have concrete ideas about how this Hesperian civilization would actually take shape?
One clue is in his use of geographical metaphors. He often describes Hesperia in terms that evoke both the landscapes of Greece and the terrain of Swabia. For example, in one poem, he celebrates towns and hills and above all its rivers of Swabia.
I see. He's drawing these parallels to suggest a deeper connection, a kind of spiritual kinship that transcends time and space.
Precisely. And this is where his use of rivers is especially important. Rivers represent both a connection to the past and this force that propels us forward towards the future. Think of the Rhine, his famous hymn. He uses the river to symbolize that creative tension between Greece and Germany.
A force that both divides and unites.
That's it. And it gets back to his belief that true harmony comes from finding a way for differences to coexist.
It's a powerful image. But I have to ask, this vision of Hesperia, it strikes me as somewhat utopian. Was he truly optimistic about achieving it? Or is there this undercurrent of longing, of melancholy in his work?
Oh, I think you're right to point out that longing. Remember, he was writing during a time of immense change, when the old order was crumbling and the future was uncertain. Hesperia can be seen as both a hopeful aspiration and this poignant reflection on what's been lost.
That's a nuanced interpretation. He was clearly a complex thinker, wrestling with both the possibilities and the limitations of human experience.
Absolutely. And as we explore his work further, we'll see these themes play out in even more subtle ways. But before we move on to the specifics of his poetic language, what are your thoughts on this idea of Hesperia?
It strikes me how relevant this vision of cultural synthesis feels today, in a world that's increasingly interconnected, but also so often marked by conflict and division. It reminds us that progress isn't about erasing our differences.
It's about finding ways to bridge them, to create something new and vibrant from that interplay of different perspectives.
Yeah, beautifully said. It speaks to the enduring power of his ideas. He challenges us to move beyond those simple binaries, to embrace complexity, to see the potential for harmony in the very things that seem to divide us.
Absolutely.
Now, we talked about measure and sobriety in poetry, but I wonder how those concepts play out in his vision of Hesperia. Did he see a connection between the discipline of art and the creation of a harmonious society?
You know, I think he did. It goes back to his understanding of what is fitting appropriate. Just as a poem needs that balance between form and content, he believed a society needs to find a way to integrate its diverse elements into a coherent whole.
So it's not about imposing order from the top down. It's about finding the right measure, the right balance, so each part can contribute to the overall harmony.
Like a well-tended garden, each plant has its own unique beauty, but also contributes to the overall design.
I love that analogy. It really highlights that organic quality of his vision. He wasn't trying to create a utopia based on abstract principles.
He wanted to see a society rooted in the specifics of its people, its place, something that could grow and evolve organically.
I'm starting to see how all these concepts measure sobriety, the foreign, harmony and opposition, Hesperia, are interconnected in his thought. They all contribute to this larger tapestry he's weaving, a tapestry that tries to reconcile the finite and infinite.
The individual and the universal, the human and the divine.
Exactly. And that's what makes his work so compelling. He's not just a philosopher. He's a poet, a visionary who uses language to create this picture of a world that's both deeply rooted in reality and yet open to the possibility of transcendence.
And that brings us to his creative process, doesn't it? How he uses language to explore these profound ideas. What intrigued you most about his use of language when you first started delving into these sources?
Honestly, I was intimidated at first. He has this reputation for being a difficult poet. But once I started reading, I was struck by the sheer beauty and power of his language.
It's not always easy, but it's evocative. It's like he's reaching for something beyond the grasp of ordinary words, hinting at it through images and sounds.
And rhythms.
Yeah.
It makes me think of his idea of swift intuitions. Like there's this kind of knowledge that comes to us in flashes and sudden insights, and it can't always be expressed logically.
Exactly. And his poetry reflects that. The unconventional syntax, the fragmented phrases, those surprising leaps of imagery.
It's like he's recreating those moments of epiphany on the page, giving us a glimpse of what it feels like to grasp something profound, something we can't quite put into words.
Absolutely.
So his language is an extension of his philosophy. It's a way of enacting his vision of the world. This idea that meaning emerges from the interplay of opposites, from the tension between the known and the unknown.
It's fascinating, isn't it? But how accessible is this kind of poetry to the average reader? Do you need a background in philosophy to appreciate it?
That's a good question, and one that's at the heart of the debate around Hölderlin. Some argue his work is too difficult, too obscure to be appreciated by anyone outside academia. But I think that does a disservice to him and to his potential readers.
You believe there's something there for a wider audience, even those who aren't immersed in literary theory.
I do, yes. It's challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. It demands our attention, our patience, our willingness to sit with ambiguity. But if we meet him halfway, open ourselves up to the power of his language, I think it can offer us profound insights. Insights into our own existence, our relationship to the world, our yearning for something more.
You said it perfectly. That's the beauty of Hölderlin's work. It invites us to engage on multiple levels, to think differently, to feel more deeply, to see the world anew.
This has already been so insightful. We've gained a much deeper appreciation for the complexity of his thought.
And we've just scratched the surface. Now we can delve into the specifics of his poetic language, how he uses imagery, rhythm, sound to create this really unique experience for the reader.
I'm looking forward to it. This is one of those deep dives that just keeps getting more and more fascinating. All right, so let's get into those specifics of Hölderlin's language. We've talked about how challenging he can be, but also how rewarding. What should we be listening for when we read his poetry? What are those key elements?
Well, one of the first things you'll notice is his use of imagery. And it's not just description. It's like he creates a whole sensory experience. Think about the way he writes about nature, rivers, mountains, forests.
They're not just background. They're almost like characters in the poems.
Exactly. And it's not just visual. He brings in sound, touch, even smell. It's immersive. Like he's trying to pull you into the experience, make you feel it.
So that's tied to his concept of the immediate, right? This idea that he wants to break through those barriers of language and connect directly with the essence of things.
That's it. He's saying words can only take us so far. We need to experience the world directly with all our senses to really understand it.
To get beyond the limitations of language.
Right. And to do that, he uses language in really unconventional ways. He inverts word order, breaks up phrases, creates this sense of movement and energy that's almost like the natural world itself.
It's like his language is alive.
Yeah.
Constantly changing, like those rivers and mountains he writes about.
I like that. It can be disorienting at times, but also exhilarating. It forces you to pay attention, to work a little harder to make sense of what he's saying.
Speaking of challenging, his concept of divine madness has always intrigued me. Is he literally saying that madness is a source of trine inspiration?
Well, it's definitely a provocative idea, but I don't think he's romanticizing mental illness. I think he's wrestling with a deeper question.
About the nature of inspiration itself.
Yeah.
Where it comes from.
Exactly. How do we access those moments of insight, those flashes of brilliance that seem to come from somewhere beyond our conscious minds?
It's like those ancient Greek oracles,
Yeah.
said to be possessed by the gods, uttering prophecies that were profound but also unsettling.
Yes. Tapping into something powerful and maybe a bit dangerous. And you see that reflected in Hölderlin's language, too. He pushes boundaries, creates new words, uses sound and rhythm in ways that can be jarring, disorienting, but also so beautiful.
So he's crafting a language that can express those experiences. Which brings us to tones, right? This idea that every word, every phrase has its own emotional resonance.
Its own vibration. And he was a master at orchestrating those tones, creating this symphony of feeling in his poetry.
So it's like composing music with words. You can almost feel the rhythm and the melody.
Exactly. His poetry speaks to our hearts as much as our minds. It bypasses our rational filters and connects us to something deeper, more primal.
So for someone who wants to explore Hölderlin, where should they start? It can seem so daunting.
I'd say start by immersing yourself in the language. Don't worry about understanding everything on the first read. Let the words wash over you. Pay attention to the sounds, the images, the rhythms, what resonates with you.
So feeling it out rather than overanalyzing.
At least initially, yes. Let your intuition be your guide. And then once you've got a feel for his style, you can start digging deeper into the meaning. There are some great commentaries and essays that can help you unpack those more challenging passages.
And don't be afraid to read his poems multiple times. Each time, you'll likely discover new layers of meaning, new connections. It's a journey of discovery.
I agree. That's the beauty of his work. It invites us to engage on so many levels. It challenges us to think differently, to feel more deeply, to see the world anew.
Well, I feel like we've done a good job unpacking Hölderlin's philosophy. We've explored his ideas about measure and sobriety, his fascination with Greece and Hesperia, those tensions between skill and fate, enthusiasm and fanaticism, and of course his really unique use of language.
And through it all, we see this striving for a sublime unity of nature and spirit. He reminds us we're part of something larger than ourselves, that there's this deep connection between the human and the divine.
And that true harmony comes from embracing those tensions, from finding that middle path.
It's a vision that's both inspiring and challenging. It pushes us to think beyond our limits, to strive for something more.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to continue your own exploration of Hölderlin's work. Keep questioning, keep connecting, and keep diving deep into those fascinating ideas.
Absolutely.
This has been Teolumen Insights. Until next time, happy reading.